All right, everybody, how you doing? We're back. It's Friday, April 28th, the last Friday of April. We're, 7 days away from, 8 days away, I guess, from a new king. How exciting. Gerald, what's happening with you?
Let me be a bit nerdish and correct you there, Mr. Ross.
Oh, no, here we go.
Charles III became king the moment his mother died. But
Okay.
you're quite right. We're going to have a coronation. I did a little bit more nerd searching or nerd type
So
searching.
why, if he's king right away, why wait months to have this elaborate, ceremony with 1,000-year-old jewels and,
Quick answer, I don't know. Long answer is I think a lot of it in the past used to be about politics, and sometimes coronations were done very quick, just in case somebody else thought they could jump into the place. Nowadays, it's much more ceremonial, and it's a sort of project management thing. But what's interesting about it, and I'm quite a fan of this coronation. I think that's not necessarily the wider view in the UK. I think most people are a bit indifferent, to be honest. But they're pretty rare things. I just looked back, and we only had 4 coronations in the 20th century. We only had 3 in the 19th century, and only 4 in the 18th century. So, this will be coronation, whatever that is, number 12 in 225 years. So they're quite rare events, really. They're up there with Harry's comet in a way, if you like.
Yeah, well, I must say, I'm excited. I'll be up. It's going to broadcast, I guess, 6 a.m. local time on Saturday. I'm going to make coronation quiche, do the whole thing.
I thought
I'm ready.
You're supposed to be some revolutionary Republican, aren't you?
Well, that's my way to sneak in. Yeah, I'm still. I will soon, after I enjoy my quiche, I will be promptly launching a Republican campaign in Canada to free Canada from the yoke of imperialism. But that's another story. Hey, I should say this is Ructions. We haven't told people the name of the show. This is Ructions with Ross and Ashley. I'm Marc Ross. This is Gerald Ashley. And now we've got a new king. We already have a new king. We get a formal ceremony. I'm excited. I'm excited for that, and I'm excited to see. Like, I'm not being totally frivolous, but this idea of like how many the Commonwealth nations, how many heads of state will Charles lose? Australia, Canada. There's certainly going to be, I think, in the next 2 weeks, a lot of stories about how many people, to your point, are indifferent in the UK, but also like around the world.
I mean, I think there may be a natural progression to these things, and I think actually everybody is far more relaxed than tabloid newspapers who want to sell copy would let us believe. And let's get an early dig in at our close friends, the French, again, because in France they do things differently, naturally. And there they don't really have this idea of a sort of Commonwealth. They just hang on to the piece of territory. So if you're in the island of Réunion in the Indian Ocean, for example, you're in part of France. So that it's Hotel California, France. You can't easily leave. Whereas I think the British Commonwealth, people will come and go. Curiously enough, we've had people join the Commonwealth. The most notable example being Mozambique, which was an old Portuguese colony. And so,
there you go. That's pretty cool.
This is America's chance to correct their earlier mistake, maybe.
Well, I'm sure there's some good folks in Maine or Massachusetts that would be keen to rejoin the Commonwealth and come back. I think what's interesting, you're right about the French overseas territories. St. Bart's, which is in the Caribbean, great place to visit, fantastic. Yeah. Actually, when you visit, you go through French customs, the whole deal. They've got the French police there, French flag, the whole deal. And apparently, St. Bart's even has a representative in the National Assembly in Paris. So I always thought
I believe
one of the best gigs ever.
And it's also true of French Polynesia, which must be a really tough place to be posted to as well.
All right. Well, now that we've exhausted all that and lost half our viewers, I think this is a good segue. Charles coming in, because this week, another old standby, our friend Joe Biden, the current president of the United States, announced via video he's running. He's doing it again. He's going for the second term.
He to me is the Japanese knotweed of American politics. Whatever happens, you can't get rid of him. I mean, you will correct me, but he's been in the Senate since the 1970s.
He was one of the youngest senators. So to be a senator, you need to be 35. I think he first got the job when he was 36. He did that, for 30 years. He was vice president for 8 years. Yeah, he's been in national politics. What is the math on that? That's like 50 years, right? I mean, it's absolutely insane. The
Now,
guy
now
is like old luggage. You're spot on.
yeah, yeah. I mean, now is this good or bad? I mean, the Chinese view of the world is very good. I think the more modern Western view of the world is that is it not time to move aside? But that said, he's clearly running, and the question I would ask as an outsider: are there any serious contenders in a Democrat runoff? Because it doesn't look like it, does it?
Well, I think there's a lot of Democrats that want to run, right? But I think they're being good team players. I certainly think, Gavin Newsom, Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. What's the governor's name in Colorado? I think it's Bennett or Bolus. There's
Mhm.
definitely some talent out there, but, they're all being good soldiers waiting for the right time. Most, RFK Jr. Got in the race. So, usually when you primary, you're the sitting president of your party, it's not really good politics internally with the
Is it
party. So,
just a way to put down a marker for 2028? Maybe is that the idea?
or like or they just want to use the platform obviously to run and get the word out, whatever their pet cause is. But yeah, I think there's a lot of jockeying behind the scenes for 2028, no doubt, which is interesting because in the video, Kamala Harris is front and center. I mean, she is like, it is Joe Biden running for president, but Kamala Harris is in that video 20 times. Even her husband makes an appearance, which is absolutely fantastic in terms of the backroom
But I thought she
politics of it all.
was I thought she was seen as a bit of a sort of dead loss and not necessarily an asset anymore.
Here's the general thing about I think there's two interesting points. I think, yes, there's not a lot of oomph or excitement for Kamala Harris. There's not a lot of oomph and excitement for Joe Biden. And but one of the biggest knocks against Joe Biden is frankly just his age. I mean, people generally like Joe Biden. He's a good guy, likes ice cream, from Scranton. He's been around for so long, like everybody kind of knows what to expect from him. Kamala's in a difficult position because everybody is like, hey, this guy's old, and if you're voting for Joe Biden, are you actually voting for Kamala Harris? So she's in this weird position because she too has to be a good
Yeah,
soldier, go along with it. I mean, she's not the top of the ticket. She can't really carve out her own space. So the politics are very interesting. But, I think it comes down to a binary situation. It's Biden against who, right? Biden against Trump, Biden probably wins. Now, Biden against somebody else, it could be the Wild West. So as it sits today, it looks like Biden, I would say, is going to get reelected. Most presidents do get reelected unless something totally
sure.
insane happens. So everything is in favor of him continuing on. But there are a lot of unknowns. And like I said, when you ask people, do you want Joe Biden to run? The answer is usually no. And that's just solely around because of his age, not because they don't like him.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Which brings us on to the opposite side of the coin, of course, which is the Donald and the huge circus. Exactly. Well done. The huge circus around him. And uh, what do we make of the current state of play there then?
The interesting thing is that Trump is an absolute political gorilla. I mean, he is shaping everything. Goes back to Trump. Like, I mean, every political story, every news story. I mean, he just sucks
Yeah.
up all the oxygen, and he's securing endorsements. This is very inside the weeds. But this week, Senator Daines from Montana, who's also the chairman of the National Senatorial Committee, his job is to help Republican senators get reelected to the U.S. Senate. I know it's boring, very inside baseball, but it's a very important role. He's got to raise a lot of money, strategist, etc. Also,
Yeah.
there's an open seat in Montana for the Senate in 2024. He endorsed Trump, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, he is like short of the chairman of the party, he's got one of the most elite positions in the Republican Party. And for
So
him to
that
come out and
that
say, I'm
yeah.
pro-Trump, basically, I mean, that to me was like the biggest announcement of the week, even bigger than Biden announcing, frankly.
So it's a real signal that there is still quite a groundswell of support for Trump. I did
And
read
Trump
another
is
thing.
hoovering up all kinds
Yeah.
of other endorsements too. And usually, I mean, I know, listen, we're months away from the first any kind of ballot. The first debate's going to be in August. The first caucus is going to be late February 2024. But Trump is lining up all kinds of congressional support that we haven't seen before, even from Florida, state that Ron DeSantis, governor of, should be hoovering up. And Trump, yeah, he's leading every poll. He's raising the money, and he sucks up all the oxygen.
Yeah, I think this is a point we made a couple of weeks ago, and also we should say hats off to you that you many months ago started to see this sort of scenario unfold, and so far so good. And I suppose The only name recognition in the race, certainly outside the United States, is going to be Ron DeSantis. But am I right in feeling he may be stalling already in this race?
Well, I definitely want to. Yeah, DeSantis is on our agenda for several reasons. He's definitely stalling. He's losing momentum. He's on this whirlwind trip. I think he's actually in the UK today, or he was yesterday. He met with Neil Farage.
Well,
Just fantastic.
we kind of missed him, or I've missed him anyhow. I didn't.
He was in, yeah. I mean, he's like floating. He's in Israel. Maybe he's on his way, but he was in Israel. He was in Tokyo this week. You know, he's trying to like say, "Hey, I'm a globalist. I know what's going on in the world." He's making the around the world trip. He's very uncomfortable. He's very awkward. Mark Leibowitz of The Atlantic wrote this great column. This is back in November of 2022, just about, just how awkward he is. And, and for me, just looking from afar, I don't know the man, but he definitely seems to me like a congressman. He doesn't seem like a president. He doesn't even seem like a governor. The other thing about Florida, which is super interesting, there are 17 media markets. I mean, it is a massive state. You have 19, 20 million people. I mean, it's in some ways, it's a country, right? And you don't really need to do the retail politics. Now, our system of president is you got to eat a lot of bad chicken. You got to go to diners in New Hampshire. You got to go to truck stops in Iowa, and you got to deal with CEOs of Amex as well as somebody who's pumping gas, and it's pretty raw. And you basically got to talk to people, and you're not on TV. Whereas like in a big media market like Florida, you just run a bunch of ads, et cetera, et cetera. But the retail component of the U.S. presidential election is unlike any other system, and it exposes everything. And frankly, you got to be charming. Like, do you want Ron DeSantis in your house for the next 4 years? Do you want to have a beer with Ron DeSantis? Right now, it doesn't seem to be no.
That test has been a downfall of plenty of other presidential candidates, or even the notable one I still always harp on about, the first George Bush, who didn't understand how supermarkets worked. And I mean, it absolutely killed him. And there've been other examples of this. And again, I suppose in a Republican runoff, Trump is going to be all over him in terms of brashness and all the rest of it.
There's two stories, and I'll give you a Bill Clinton story. So Bill Clinton, governor. So like to me, governors know what the hell's going on. Like they're executives, so they gotta they gotta deal with all kinds of different people, legislators, judicial branch. They're at the center of it, tons of attention, media. So when Bill Clinton was president, he had this thing called the candy shop, right? And the candy shop was staffed by people that just placated members of the Democratic Party. You want tickets to the Kennedy Center? Done. You want a photo on the South Lawn? Done. You want a photo with Buddy the cat? Done. And they kept track of all this stuff, right? And people need, it's politics. It's a human enterprise, and you got to grease the wheels. Trump is doing the same thing.
It's a hearts and minds campaign, isn't it?
100%. And Trump, he's inviting people to Mar-a-Lago, come down, have dinner, stay at the resort, and DeSantis isn't doing any of that. When George W. Bush ran for president, the first time he didn't campaign. In fact, for 8 weeks, he invited people to Austin, right? Come to the governor's mansion, eat some barbecue, all this kind of cultivating, building friendships. And DeSantis seems to generally lack that. He has no interest in that. He's surrounded by people that don't appreciate that and are not giving him that advice. And it's just very interesting that DeSantis is definitely stalling. Now, I could see a scenario in 8 weeks' time where the press pivots and say, DeSantis is the comeback kid. He's the greatest. He's done all this great stuff.
But currently, he doesn't seem able to work the room, does he?
He doesn't seem to be able to work the room, and he doesn't seem to want to work the room, which is a huge problem. And let's face it, this is a campaign that's going to require close to $1 billion, which seems crazy, but you're going to need 80 million votes to win. So if you do $12 a vote, that gets you to $1 billion. And can Ron DeSantis get 80 million Americans to vote for him without charm? I don't think so. So we'll see what happens, but there could be a pivot. You've been told. The press doesn't want Biden Trump this far out. So, expect a second act for Ron DeSantis.
Yeah, we need more excitement before, the dog days of winters in New Hampshire and all the rest of it.
Speaking of excitement, Keir Starmer. Starmerism, it's happening. DeSantis is going down. To me, Starmer is on fire. Getting great press. Everybody's rolling out the red carpet. Everybody's he's measuring the carpets and the drapes already in number 10. He's on fire.
Well, I'm I'm rather amazed by your use of the adjective excitement or whatever you just said. I mean, to me, he is a sort of charisma-free zone. And I think we may have got a situation in British politics a little bit like how Claudius became emperor in Rome. Claudius became emperor in Rome because nobody else was half capable of even doing the job.
By the way, I love that you're bringing up, the Roman Empire. I was at with drinks with somebody recently. I said, we're still living in the Roman Empire, and they're like, "Give me an example." And I said, "Any conversation you have, somebody's going to bring up a Roman Empire."
Yeah,
And here you have, we're still living in Rome. It's great.
Yeah,
Anyways,
I
go
did
on.
it totally unprompted, and that reminds me of Gore Vidal's book or books about U.S. presidents that he compared them to being emperors, and I think that's something we should dive back into another time. But anyhow, back to Mr. Starmer. He is sort of he's sort of everybody's second choice.
Right.
And in the same way as John Major was when he became leader of the Tory party, Starmer, the left wing don't want Starmer, but if they have to have somebody, maybe Starmer. The Blairite right probably think, oh yeah, Starmer's the man, but he's not fully bought into everything. And so as often as the case, it's the second best that comes through. That said, one struggling to look at the Labour front bench to see who else it would be, to be frank. And of course, the old adage in British politics is now sort of coming home in spades, which is that governments don't win elections. Oppositions don't win elections. It's governments lose them.
Yeah.
And, the Tory party are giving us a masterclass in how not to win the next election.
I mean, what are you saying? You're saying not having 5 prime ministers in 6 years is a good strategy to keep yourself in power?
This is the sort of Chinese menu way of running a political party, isn't it? If you don't like the first election, try another one.
So let me ask you about, DeSantis, I think charm is an important component of U.S. politics and presidency, George Bush chopping wood, riding his mountain bike. I mean, Bill Clinton, like who wouldn't want to hang out with Bill Clinton and have a cheeseburger? But is it the other way in the UK? I mean, Blair did have a little bit of panache, but is it just like the time and place that Starmer is just like, listen, yeah, let's play it cool. Let's let the other guys fail and we'll come in the other way. Let's just not rock the boat. Let's just be boring.
I think that's definitely the plan of his advisors. To me, he strikes me as somebody who's not very politically adept, and so will kind of do as he's told a little bit. And it's clearly the way of things. There are a couple of hurdles or sort of elephant traps to come. One of which is unfolding in Scotland at the moment, which is this whole saga of identity politics and trans rights and this whole business of treatment of minors and children and all the rest of it. And that has really blown up the Scottish National Party in a fairly big way. That could well happen in Labour. We could see a breakout of sort of internecine warfare. But that said, Starmer has shut down that wing pretty well. And I think he'll try and keep them quiet, obviously, until election. How
has he shut it down? Just by saying, listen, like, why? Yeah, once again, why rock the boat? We're on the glide path. Let's not screw this up.
Yeah, they've chucked a few people out, including, Jeremy Corbyn is no longer even a member of the party, and he was the last leader. And they've also very carefully
and he was a rock star. I mean, his campaign rallies were fantastic.
Well, yeah.
Okay, I know. I mean, listen, I know you. I'm as a strategist. Anytime you get that many people out to hear a politician, you can't discount it. But I
thought the day he appeared on Glastonbury, that was peak Corbyn. If he was a stock, you would have sold him. It was so obvious. But I think
I'd go to Glastonbury.
Well, whatever. Now, to the point. I mean, but politics across the spectrum in the UK is pretty second rate, or people perceive it as being pretty second rate. There's a survey out today saying something like 65% of the UK electorate feel lost. They don't feel any alignment to any particular party. Now, there are two versions here. One version is, well, that's because all politicians are useless.
Right.
I think the more more subtle version of things is to say that politicians have got in making promises that Britain as a country cannot remotely afford. How on earth can we be a global power, support the National Health Service, have a welfare system and government payment system where nearly 50% of people are eligible for some form of payments? You want money, ask the government, they'll give it to you. And of course, in return, we've got inflation. But maybe it's the British electorate is the problem here, that we kind of need to grow up, that we can't actually have all these toys, and that somebody somewhere is going to have to say, we face some hard choices. And there seems to be nobody in politics who's prepared to risk their neck and say, look, you've tried every shape and form of politician and none of it's worked.
Right.
So my long-term guaranteed to be wrong prediction is that Starmer wins and is hopeless. And then when the next general election, 3, 4, 5 years comes, Lord knows what happens, because then I think the British electorate will have said, look, we've tried everything now. We've tried coalitions under Cameron. We had to go with Mrs. May. Good grief, Boris appeared. And then if you thought that was unusual, Liz Truss came and went before you noticed she was there. Now we've got Rishi. Rishi is kind of a European technocrat. He would sit very well inside Brussels, I think.
No, he's somebody you'd want to manage your portfolio or your subsidy.
He's classic, managerial type.
So let me.
Mr. Starmer, I think, will be the same. And then I think we may get to a situation where the British electorate say, good grief, how on earth can we find something new? And that may be an opportunity or a dangerous vacuum. And we shall just have to wait and see.
Well, it sounds exciting. I love it. Dangerous vacuums that was the name of my high school garage band.
Well, yeah. Well, why am I not surprised?
Let me ask you. So you think Starmer is going to be? Do you see any kind of upset or kind of narrative story? Like, do you think the press is going to be more critical of him, or do you think?
Well, he doesn't get a good press. He doesn't get a good press anyhow. And Boris ran this campaign that Starmer was Captain Hindsight, and is always second with the answer after the result.
Right.
I think a more important factor actually is Scotland, because clearly the SNP are going to lose seats in the next general election.
Yeah, spot on.
Depending who you believe, anywhere between 10 or even 20.
Yeah.
And they'll all go Labour, with maybe 2 or 3 of the shires might go Tory. And that could be what gets Starmer over the line. But I wouldn't be surprised if he wins in a lackluster campaign. I'm bored with it already, and it's 18 months away. And he wins on a small majority.
Yeah, there's no doubt the Labour Party is going to be spending a lot of time in Edinburgh and Glasgow and back and forth. In fact, they may even skip the middle of England and go flyover country. Maybe the middle of England now will be flyover country. Just go straight north.
Plus,
when do you think we're going to go ahead?
There is another factor in the south where a lot of disaffected Tories might go Lib Dem, which would just split the Tory vote a bit. So
you can see the electorate though, like saying, listen, we've given the Tories 12 years, like let's send a message. You're right, Starmer might not be that bad, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, the voters are going to play an interesting role, as they always do. And the psychology of who's going to vote, I don't think is going to be completely party driven this time. I think a lot of it's going to be sending a message.
I think that's true. And as I say, my current betting, and this is subject to reversals when I look like I'm going wrong, and I'll try and claim hindsight. I never said it, but my current view is that Labour win, and they win with, say, a 10 to 15 seat majority.
What do you think the election is?
Well, some people think the summer of next year.
But you think it's definitely going to be you're going to say, you think it's in 24?
Oh, it's definitely in 24. Because
the question is it summer or is it fall of 24?
They've got to get some so-called tax cuts in. Let me translate that. That is to cut some of the taxes they've already risen. So
would be nice. Would be amazing to have the U.S. and the U.K. both have elections in the 2024 fall.
Yeah, it could happen, and I don't know, Starmer Trump would be an interesting interesting meeting, wouldn't it?
That'll be Starmer's first visit, flying across the pond to meet President Trump. Okay, there we go.
One last tiny prediction on this. I think that Rishi won't survive very long if he loses the general election, because the membership don't like him. It's only the MPs, and if the MPs are a reduced body in a new parliament, I think he'd be packing his bags within a year.
He'll probably, like Haig did, he'll resign before the sun rises. Okay, let's talk about underwater cables. Speaking of water, that was a good segue. You noticed this story this week that the Russians have been driving their subs around looking at cables that power the World Wide Web.
How shocking!
The Ructions podcast may be disrupted by Russian subs. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, all I can say is how shocking. I mean, how dare they go around doing things like this in international waters? Aren't they? Don't they realise they're the baddies and they're just supposed to lose everything? Maybe it's more seriously, it's yet another sort of tiny little wake-up call. I suspect defence analysts and all the rest of it know about all of this, and there may be some politicking going on here to get some more government spending. But clearly, now the man in the street, and as I like to say, and would include myself, the armchair admirals have spotted that this is, it's a key vulnerability. I didn't do my homework before coming on, but I do recall there was a genuine accident of a large internet cable off Egypt. I think it was about 5 years ago now, and it pulled out about 20% of the net for nearly 2 days. And so we've got used to this idea that everything is really stable and resilient and shockproof, and it isn't. As I constantly have to remind myself and other people that there's no such thing as a cloud. It's somebody else's server farm. There isn't. I think the marketing guys have sold us the idea of the invincibility of the internet. To me, it is still quite vulnerable. I mean, we know the history. It was set up to be a multipolar sort of network that could survive nuclear attacks. But that was the view when it was being used in a very limited way in the 1960s. I mean, if a net went down seriously for a couple of days, I can't imagine what the consequences would be. They would be very serious.
We can't. Yeah. I mean, I can't do anything without being connected. No. I can't watch television. I can't do baking. I cannot make a doctor's appointment. I can't get, prescription drugs.
How do you deal with your bank?
Yeah.
Insurance. Will the water turn on? We forget a lot of utilities are very embedded in internet stuff, and so a lot of physical things might not work. How the hell do supply chains get food to supermarkets, or the critical one, that normally the first one to go, which is tankers to petrol or gasoline stations?
So you got to think that we're going to see within the next 25 years some kind of purposeful hijacking or but it'll be an act of war, but it won't be kinetic in the sense of bombs dropping. It'll be cutting off infrastructure. I just read this great article a few weeks back. The Far North Fiber is a group out of they essentially want to build, imagine this, more fiber, which is great. I think what you're going to see is maybe more cables. They want to go from Japan through the Bering Strait, basically the Northwest Passage to northern Canada, end up in Ireland, over to London, and also split off to Oslo, which could be great. So you could be seeing, once again, the Northwest Passage, the Arctic Ocean becoming more of a site for more structure, more physical. But once again, it's a physical fiber that they've got to drop to make this happen.
Also, military presence, because, again, it's only a few years ago that stunt that the Russians placed some sort of underwater flag near the North Pole and tried to claim it was part of Russia and all this nonsense. And certainly amongst our Canadian listeners and viewers, I know Canada is very alert to all of this situation, and it's serious.
You wonder Yeah, it's so serious it doesn't get talked about. It's like it's one of these issues that is frankly so serious and so critical to our survival and our quality of life that, politicians don't want to talk about it. They want to talk about other kind of silly issues. Speaking of other silly issues, wolf warrior diplomacy appears to be back. The Chinese ambassador in Paris did a simple interview last week where he basically said that the Baltic states, Ukraine, are in fact not sovereign, not free, and are still part of generally the Soviet Union, which caused a lot of head scratching, a lot of consternation. Was quickly walked back on Beijing, but I'm a firm believer that this was done very intentionally to send a message to China's friend in Russia and Putin. Hey, we got your back. And as we sort out this Crimea situation in Ukraine, we're going to say, hey, Crimea has always been a part of Russia. I think this was a test balloon. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you and I, we're always in the cynics corner, aren't we? And we sort of think, well, none of these guys say anything by chance. And my God, if you're a ambassador to a major G7 country, you're incredibly close to the thinking in Beijing. I mean,
what was amazing about Beijing's response is they said the ambassador was giving his personal viewpoint, which I don't know if you've dealt with any Chinese diplomats. They can't even give their personal viewpoint on what to order at a restaurant. I mean, the idea that this guy was like freelancing, just having a TV interview on a random Friday. Yeah, this is my personal perspective. But
I suspect this is an in-joke in diplomatic circles, but I can't imagine. You're dead right again. So, but the wider issue again, I know we don't talk about it quite so much as we did in the past about Ukraine. That still rumbles on. And just maybe on the Chinese angle about things around the world, obviously China seems to be sort of slightly on the fringe of things now with Ukraine. But I was quite struck by the large Chinese presence in Sudan and how they're being airlifted out and got out also apparently by units of the Chinese Navy. So I don't know if they're going to the coast. But there again, it's very easy to be frozen in a world where we just don't assume that lots of other actors are doing what we're doing. And so it turns out China, unsurprisingly, has quite a significant presence in Sudan. And they have the wherewithal, and they also have the political will to get people out. They didn't just shrug their shoulders and say, well, good luck. If you went to Khartoum, that's it. And again, it's just another tiny marker of how China is much more on the geopolitical map, I think.
Yeah, it's one of these things too that I feel, as an observer of China and, one who's trying to understand a very complex system, both that is communist, central party, but also has a long cultural history. It's a civilization, but yeah, I think we need to be, I don't know, paying more attention to like what these ambassadors are saying, how they're playing the game, and I don't know, not be a bit more sophisticated in our dealing with China.
I don't think it's a gaffe by him, because if it was a serious gaffe, he would be on a plane home and would already be in some appalling sort of re-education camp. I think it's a much more subtle game than that. I think your view is right.
No, I think I'm going to try the next time I disappoint one of my family members or my wife. I'm going to say, listen, this is just a personal viewpoint.
Yeah,
we'll see how that goes over. I think you're spot on.
I'm sure you'll get a very diplomatic response to that.
All right. As we wrap up here, you brought up this issue about the staffing. You've noticed some staffing shortages, especially around transport, etc., in the hospitality industry. What are your insights? What's happening here?
Well, depending who you are and what day of the week you go into London on and which part of London you go to, London is not back to 2019 levels. Some parts of it are on some days. And so we are sort of morphing into this Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday culture. That said, the financial sector seems very much against that. So the big boys like Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan and co. have pretty much demanded you get back to your desk 5 days a week. But then equally, you can just scan through papers and read articles about people who are job hunting who, people who won't even apply for a job if it's not a so-called hybrid job with at least 2 days at home.
Right.
Now, some things you can't do from home. You can't be a waiter at home. You can't be a chef. You can't be a hairdresser. There's a heap of things where you kind of have to turn up to do the job. And a lot of those people appear to be missing. Now, there's a couple of mantras going on. One is that a lot of people have taken early retirement, they'll never come back. Well, we'll see. I think there may be some truth in that. The local one in Britain is to blame everything on Brexit. Oh, well, it's all Brexit because all these EU nationals have got out of Britain before it sinks into the Atlantic Ocean and all the rest of it. And of course, which is a lovely story until you find that there are really quite difficult staff shortages in restaurants in France. And that Schiphol made an announcement a couple of weeks ago that they're having to well, I wouldn't say permanently, but for a significant period of time, they're going to reduce the number of flights they can service because they simply don't have the staff to do it. So, it's a cliche to say now something has changed since 2019, and maybe it'll take 20, 30 years for us to see what the full impact of all this is. But there has been a fracture in the job market in one way or another, and it's showing up in restaurants not opening on Mondays. That's quite common now in London for restaurants not to be open on a Monday. And okay, in London, Monday was always probably a quiet day, but it was worth opening, and they just simply don't open anymore.
I had a conversation earlier this week with Rob Atkinson. He runs a technology think tank here in DC, and interestingly, he's a PhD in urban planning, and he comes from physical space, like how do you organize? Right. But he's also at the forefront of tech think tank, and even he was like, if you live in the DC area, we have all this great tech, but listen, let's get together twice a week at least in the office and spend some time together. And I've been thinking about this, like we're almost entering a period where we're at a mass scale for certain folks, like we're back in college. That is like you show up to the classroom for the lecture, but the rest of the time is really up to you, like how you want to work, where you want to work. And but all these second and third tier infrastructure, stores, retail shops, the local druggists, restaurants especially, but then like do you have more travel? It's a very weird situation in the sense of like how to plan for
it. It's also screwing up long-term plans. So does it make sense to invest as much money into the railways in the UK?
Right.
People are spending more time at home. The counter argument is, well, you've got to do it to get them moving again or whatever. But, suddenly the third runway, which into Heathrow, which is amazingly important, seems to have almost been entirely forgotten about.
Well, here in Northern Virginia, Amazon's building their second headquarters, but it was a 2-part series, and the second part is going to be delayed. In fact, they may never even build it now because of what's happening. They don't need the space. And there's been bubblings and rumblings around commercial real estate in the States, all these mortgages coming due, which don't really hit the big 4 banks. It hits more of these kind of super regional banks.
Yeah.
Who's going to pay for that? And
there's a well-known problem with the property cycle because it's really difficult to get a skyscraper or a really big building built. You've got to get planning, there's a lot of things that have to be put together, design, you've got to get the financing in place. So it's normally fairly late in the cycle that they start building these buildings. And then quelle surprise, the market peaks and they're still building them. And you often get a lot of retail and particularly office space hit the market at the very point that the market is sliding down the other side.
Right.
And, in London, we are still planning and building, humongous great buildings. And to me, it's, and I'm open to correction here. I for the life of me, can't see how they're going to get occupied.
Yeah. Well, the famous skyscraper index, I think a year ago we talked about this in Miami. They're building a 100-story condo, hotel, superstructure. Wow. Anyways,
the skyscraper index and also mega mergers always point to tops.
What do you see a sense where maybe it's almost like maybe it's the other way too? I was thinking about these guys, and let's get back to the North Sea. These guys, these men and women working on oil rigs, essentially, they're 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Could you have a situation where people compact it? They're in the office for 2 weeks straight. Maybe it's a foreign office or it's a remote office, but do you see that happening? Like we're just gonna do with daily commuting. It's gonna be more intense.
Well, you can kind of cut it up lots of different ways. And it's whether, I think a really big argument, and I think it's still open, is, are people more efficient at home or are they more efficient in work? And my own personal view is, I think if you spend a day or two at home, you get a hell of a lot done because you haven't got interruption of pointless meetings and things. So these days, of course, you've got Zoom and Teams and Lord knows what else. But equally, if you're home 4 or 5 days a week, you probably do very little. You spend most of the time kind of bouncing around, playing with the family pets. In my case, spending far too much time near the fridge, and not a lot.
Well, there's probably the thought too, like, oh, I've got 5 days at home. I'm more productive over 2. Like, there's like a psychological,
Yeah,
like,
there may
oh,
be,
I've got
there
time to
may
do
be.
this.
But it has big infrastructure impacts if everybody decides to do the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday thing. Because
I find I'm most productive myself at a power lunch. So I'm here to support the restaurants.
This is where I think once again we are in violent agreement on power lunches. Yeah.
All right, so I think we're both generally bearish is the right word on the city center, or is it we're still a bit unknown? It's early days.
I think it's all to play for, but I think there are one or two notable exceptions. There's a guy who's my namesake, not a relative, Mike Ashley, who has invested a huge amount in buying up distressed retail brands and seems to be making a real go of it on the high street. But even he is complaining that you're at a big disadvantage because of rental and of course business taxes. And
right.
So you may see a lot of lobbying towards politicians to change the business tax framework, but of course, small problem there means they've got to raise the tax from somewhere else. And the general public doesn't see business taxes, but boy, would they see it if there was more personal taxation.
100%. All right, as we wrap up, this is a good discussion. We covered a lot.
Yeah.
All right, as we close up, what we're reading and watching. Joe, okay, you go first.
Okay. We'll do reading first of all. This is a book I had on the shelf for, I don't know, maybe 20 or so years. It's an American guy called John Allen Paulus. He's a kind of popular. He's a mathematician. He's a professor in mathematics somewhere down in Philadelphia. He's I don't think he'd thank me for saying it like that. I have met him.
Well, he might be at the University of Pennsylvania, right? Which is an Ivy League school, but some rando Philadelphia school.
Don't worry.
Philadelphia is a great city, but I could see yeah.
Yeah, no, he's
some random
heavy. Yeah, this guy's a heavy hitter. The book I'm recommending is called "A Mathematician Reads the Newspaper," and he's written a load of these books. He's written another good one on a mathematician and the stock market. He's written a really good, slim little volume called "Innumeracy." But in this one, he takes to task the fact that statistics in newspapers are kind of all over the place, and again, quelle surprise, newspapers start with the answer, and then they backfill the statistics to make it fit the story they're writing. And it's a very entertaining book, and he makes some really good points about how, all the stuff we know quite well, really, be cautious with data, be cautious with how people use statistics. But you don't even need to be able to add up to appreciate this book. He's done that very difficult thing, I think, which is to write what could be a very complex subject in a really straightforward manner. So entertaining book. As I say, the guy is John Allen Paulus. You can look him and you'll find a heap of his books, but I've just gone for this particular one. In terms of viewing, by a country mile, I think the film I saw last week, War Sailor on Netflix, is a stunning film. In fact, I think technically, I'm not certain if it came out as a one-piece film because it'd be a bit long, but on Netflix, it's been divided into 3 episodes. And it's in Norwegian with subtitles, which certainly doesn't degrade
it. You don't think I speak Norwegian?
Well, I'm bubbling under.
You're saying for the rest of the audience.
Yeah, I'm work in progress, I think is what we say. But more seriously, it is basically, again, it's one of these stories which I suppose we sort of know about, but don't really know about, is how lots of commercial sailors and shipping staff got called up in the Second World War almost by chance. So Norway gets invaded by the Germans, and a large number of Norwegian sailors, not in in the merchant marine, not in military, find themselves at sea, and suddenly the targets of U-boats and all the rest of it, and the quite hellish experiences a lot of them had. And so it is a fictional piece, but it's very grounded in the facts of the time, and it's maybe because it's in Norwegian, it is very atmospheric, and it's extremely well done, and it also has more than one focal point. So it's not just sailors in the sea; it's also their families who are left at home in Norway, and how again we tend to forget the British spend a lot of time bombing Norwegian towns, not deliberately bombing the Norwegians who are trying to get at military facilities and dock facilities in particular. But of course, in that dreadful phase, there was a lot of collateral damage. The problem this film had is it came out at the same time as the All Quiet on the Western Front, because I think it did pick up a foreign film award at the Oscars, but I think otherwise it would have been much more prominent as a winner. So highly recommended, basically.
I love it. Sounds good. No, I would like to know more about Norway's role in World War II. So that sounds great. All right, I've got for you. I've read this a few weeks. Well, it's been maybe a year ago, but The Club.
Right.
It's the story of the Premier League, how it became the richest, most powerful, most successful professional sports league in the planet. It really captures the last 25 years. The Premier League. It's a really good business book. It's got a lot of good insights on marketing, human behavior. The need to have like nice restrooms at stadiums, nice surroundings. Make this a professional environment, and they've really gone for it. I mean, the Premier League is an absolute juggernaut. The amount of kids here in the States wearing, Tottenham shirts is frankly, it's amazing. I mean, for Americans to be paying attention,
probably more than in North London.
That's probably true, but it's a great book, and it's a pretty powerful read. But it's got some really good, even if you're not into soccer, I think it's a great book on business, marketing, and also ambition. This magazine is kind of fun. It's called Food and Culture. These are done. They're very high end magazines, and it's done by a design firm in South Korea. And essentially, what they do is they do a deep dive for their brand magazines. Like they'll do a deep dive on IKEA, Staub, cookware. History, great photos, etc. This one is on coffee, doing a deep dive on it. But it's a high-end magazine. It's a fun read. It's something you can keep on your night table or put out for your fancy friends. But
now that topic, I mean, you're obviously in that demographic, but I think our mutual friend Rory Sutherland, who is the king of wanting to get the perfect cup of coffee, would love that magazine. So we must let him know somehow.
And it's a fun. I'm a huge fan of print, and it's just exciting to see that people haven't given up on it. It's not a book, it's not a magazine, it's somewhere in between. And but it's a powerful way to capture something, that I enjoy, and so does Rory and other fine folks. I'm going to give you another Netflix show, The Diplomat. I don't know if you saw this. Carrie Russell.
Yeah,
she's the U.S. ambassador in London. But she's a professional civil servant. She really wants to be in Afghanistan on the front lines. She doesn't want to be dealing with the pomp and circumstance of London, but she's put in there. But why is she put in there? Is she a plant? Is she part of this other operation? The scheming, her husband, the president, the prime minister, they're all scheming together. It's a fun little drama.
This has been written for you, Mark. I mean, this
is absolutely, I was taking copious notes. I looked at it more as a documentary as opposed to entertainment.
Well,
it's a good twist. The Scotland is involved, to your point, and the prime minister, his ambitions. How does he become a great leader? What does he need to do? And is the prime minister playing straight with everybody? That's really what's happening.
Well, but given some of our prime ministers, would they even know?
The funny thing about these political shows, they're always like the way you hope government operates, right? Like competent, sexy, interesting people. But in reality, we know that they're just humans, and
No,
they're not as
yeah.
competent and sexy as Kerry Russell.
Well, before we slide off the air, I just want to do a very quick shout out, which obviously to British and any Australian viewers, listeners will be a familiar name, but maybe not so much elsewhere, was the death this week of actor, writer, comedian Barry Humphries. Now, Barry Humphries is kind of one of those guys you either know about or don't, but he's, in a very well-worn phrase, I think he may last as a cultural icon. He's probably best known to people as Dame Edna Everage, but he was actually quite an accomplished painter and poet and writer as well. So I think, just from a personal point of view, I think the world's a slightly smaller place without Barry Humphries.
Oh, that was a nice sign off. Won't make a joke about that. That was nice. Good. And, well, I will make one joke. He's part of the Commonwealth. Would he be as successful if, as an Australian? If Australia was solo, would he been as successful an artist?
Everything for you is politics, right?
I mean, you got to look at, this is the world we live in, I mean.
No. It's the world you think we live in.
Wait a minute. What is happening? Where am I now?
I don't know. This means we shall need a whole new episode just to examine what you're really thinking.
A whole new episode, so our friends in Italy will finally be paying attention to us. Hello, Ariana Italia. Don't make us go to Denmark.
Exactly.
All right, Gerald. Great to chat with you as always. A lot of fun. I guess we'll see you after the coronation. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Long live King Charles.
Exactly. And also a bad day for the astrologers around the world who for years, if not decades, have said, A, he would never become king, and B, now he is already king, that he would never be crowned. So long as he gets through Saturday week, I think there'll be a lot of astrologers who will have forgotten those cast iron predictions.
Speaking of predictions, how did you do with the horse track?
Sadly, as usual, it was another very good donation to that very sort of downtrodden group of people, bookmakers. They desperately needed my money, and they got it.
Yeah, the thing about Las Vegas is, you got to be like, who paid for this? It wasn't the casinos. It was
exactly
the
those meals at Vegas are not free, right? They're not free.
All right, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Gerald.